Welcome to Building a Simple User Interface. My name is Judy Lipinski and I'll be your instructor for this module. So far you've done some background work to set up your projects and you've even created custom icons. Now you're ready to start building your user interface. So we're going to take a look at what we need to do to accomplish that. And one thing is understanding what views and view groups are and what our options are. We're going to be creating layouts, and there's a few choices here, so we're going to talk about what the difference is between things such as a linear layout and a relative layout. We'll also take a look at how do we start adding those views to our XML layouts. We have a couple of options here, and we'll take a look at using drag and drop features as well as the ability to modify properties. And we're going to focus in on specifically the text view. It's really at the heart of things because it contains a lot of information related to text, and then EditText, which inherits from text view, and Button, which also inherits from text view. So as we go along and start looking at properties, you'll find things that are going to be applicable across multiple views that you'll be working with. So the first thing to take a look at are views and view groups. Whenever we talk about the activity that we're creating, it's really made up of views. And here we have an example with just some information on the screen. You can see some information such as text and buttons and radio buttons and checkbox and more. So views really extend from the view class and inherit certain properties because of that. And as far as the views that we start to add in to our different activities, we'll take a look at that text view, which just as the name implies, holds on to text. And in this case, it's going to be displayed to the user. Sometimes people will refer to these as labels, but try to be consistent with the terminology and we'll refer to those as text views. Text views are primarily used for displaying information, but there is an option to make them editable as well. If you know you're working with editable text, though, there is an option called EditText. And this provides a few different ways that we can allow users to interact with the system. And depending on the choices that we make, we can even change the way the keyboard is presented to the user. And then Button. Button's another one that extends from text view because it has text that is on the button itself. And buttons are expected to do certain things such as be clicked, and they can have different states. So we're going to primarily be working with text view, EditText, and Button, although there's additional views we might work with as well, such as a radio button and making a choice between a few different options. A checkbox where we can toggle something to be either checked or unchecked. An image view where we can start to include imagery in our designs. And then an image button where it's a button but we use an image to represent that button. As I mentioned, these views are inheriting from the view class, which is available to us. Now, primarily within the view class, we're going to focus on the view group. The view group is a view, and it holds on to other views. So view groups have properties inherited from view. They have the ability to set things such as padding, as well as other properties that we'll be taking a look at. But the big thing about view groups is they contain other views, such as the text view. And the text view is another major class to be familiar with because other classes inherit from it. So think again of the view group as being a container of child views. And it could hold on to things such as the text view, an edit view, and a button, but it also can hold on to another view group, and that view group can hold on to text views as well as other items. So your layouts can start to become a little bit complicated, and we want to make sure that we approach them in a way that makes the most sense to you and is easy to work with, but also is going to have good performance for our users of our apps. So the way that we manage the layout of these views is using the layout. And here's the example we are working with the activity main.xml. And we're going to start looking at some of the pieces that make up this layout and adding to it. First of all, notice the root node. It's relative layout. It's one of the layout managers that we have available. It's also considered to be the view group because it's holding on to other views. Now to work with this in the XML file, we're making use of the Android namespace. That allows us to work with attributes such as layout width, padding, and so on, even working with the views that we include, such as a text view, which also has this layout width and the text that is being used for display. So again, a view group is holding on to another view here, in this case, the text view. So the different view groups that we work with, I just showed you relative layout. Another popular one is linear layout, and then there's also frame layout. There's actually a few more, but when you're getting started, these are the layouts that you'll work with a lot. Now, each one of these has their own attributes. For linear, for example, we might be working with a vertical or a horizontal linear layout. And with relative, there's certain work that we need to do to lay out items relative to each other. And then with frames, well, we're going to break that down and to have multiple views being involved as well. So each one has their own attributes, but then they all inherit also from ViewGroup.Layout params. So there's things that we're going to be learning as we work with linear and relative that'll be applicable to working with the other layouts. Let's take a look at an example of some of those layout params that are inherited. The layout width and the layout height are able to take on values such as match parent. So let's take a look at what that looks like. It means that the element that you're placing is going to be as big as its parent, minus any padding. So the example below shows a parent item with an item that's been placed inside of it where the width has been set to match parent. So notice it is wide as the parent with a little bit of spacing around it, which is the padding. So if you're familiar with the box model and web design, we have the same kind of concept here of paddings and margin. So really we're just saying there's a little bit of space from the outer edge outside of the match parent item between it and the parent container. Another option that we can go with is called wrap content, which in this case means be just big enough to hold on to its content. Again, there may be some padding involved here as well. So those are the two main options, to match parent and wrap content, and those are being used here for the layout width. But notice that the layout height is not the same size as the parent. So which one do you think is being used for the layout height? Wrap content. It's only as big enough for the content that it's holding. Now, one other option that you have when you're working with these layouts is to go with an exact number. For example, you can go with 16 density independent pixels, or DP. So let's take a look at some of the specifics in working with the layout managers. And first, we're going to take a look at linear layout. With linear layout, we are going to specify that we either want to work with a vertical or a horizontal positioning. So we're going to position items inside of linear layout, and they're just going to stack vertically or align themselves horizontally. So here's an example where we have Android orientation set to horizontal, and we have 3 buttons, and notice how they just line up side by side in a horizontal fashion. We also have Android orientation vertical, and they just stack up vertically. And that's really what all there is to it with linear layout. It's a very simple layout to work with, and it's very intuitive for when you're starting out. Now, one thing that you might want to adjust is something called Android gravity. And in the shot here, we can see a few different options that are available for Android gravity. And we also have a screen showing examples of those in usage. So the buttons here have gravity applied to them. And notice it is Android : gravity. So the first button we're saying bottom, and the text is aligning with the bottom part of the button. So it's actually kind of pushed up a little bit, defying gravity, if you will. And the middle one is top, so the text is aligned at the top part of the button, so it's really pushing it down. And then we have no gravity, which is just the default. Another option that we might want to set is Android weight. So if we have buttons aligned in a horizontal or a vertical fashion, we might want to assign some weight or importance to one item over another. So here we have a text view and 2 buttons being displayed in a horizontal fashion. And we're using the layout_weight to assign a value. So the text view has a value of 1, the button B1 has a value of 1, and then the third button has a value of 4. So it breaks up the screen and basically assigns more importance to that last button, making it wider on the screen. So let's take a look now at relative layout and how that one is a bit different. With relative layout, we're positioning items relative to a different element on the screen or its parent. So here's a screen that's been laid out using buttons where we're aligning either to the parent, as we are with B1 and the one in the middle, B6, or we're placing other buttons related to B1 or B3 and so on. So it gives us a little more flexibility in the way we're laying things out. It's not just a linear layout because we have things stacking up vertically as well as horizontally. And this is simpler than having nested linear layouts. You could achieve the same effect by using a linear layout that contains other linear layouts. So the way that would look is we would first have a vertical linear layout for the entire screen here. And then we would get to the area where we have buttons side by side, we would nest another linear layout that has a horizontal orientation. And then we would continue on with another vertical item, but then have another horizontal oriented layout. So it gets to be a little bit more complicated. And we don't really want to complicate things because that can affect performance. Instead, let's focus for a moment here on relative layout and some of the attributes that we can set. First of all, if you want to position something relative to the parent, we are going to set these attributes and they're going to take on a value of true or false. So notice we have in the first box align parent top, parent bottom, parent right, and parent left. Again, you would just indicate a true-false value if you would want to work with these, and it will take the item that you're positioning and align it with the parent. We also have an align parent start and align parent end. And that might seem redundant at first if we already have a parent left or a parent right, but do remember that people can change their devices to have a right to left orientation, especially in other countries where that might be desired. So we have a parent start and a parent end if you want that to be flexible enough and change when we go from a left to right to a right to left orientation. Another thing we can do is centering. We can center horizontal, vertical, or just center in parent for both horizontal and vertical. And then in the last row here, we have align with parent if missing. The idea here is if an element goes missing, then we're going to have it default to aligning up with the parent. And things don't just go missing all the time, it's just programmatically. You might remove something from the flow, and we would like it to align with the parent. So again, these are all options that we can use to position an item relative to the parent. And here we can see the Android ID with the plus symbol being used. So this is the first time we're seeing this one, but we're identifying the button that we're placing by using the @ symbol and then a plus symbol, an ID, and then giving it the name button 1. By doing so, we can now start to place other buttons relative to this button, and they can refer back using that ID. So when you do layout attributes related to other elements, again, you need to make sure that they have an ID, and then we refer to that ID. So notice the buttons that we have here. In the first bit of XML, we have an ID where we have a button 2, and it is using a layout with an align feature, align bottom, to the ID of button 3. And it's to the left of button 3, and it's to the start of button 3. So even though we're looking at button 2, we're referring to button 3 for our placement. And then the next button below that, we're indicating also that it is below, to the right, and to the end of button 1. Okay, so that again gives us an idea that we can position items relative to other items on the screen. But to make that happen, we do need to make sure we're using the resources. So we have the @ symbol with the plus ID. And the first time you reference something, you want the plus symbol in there. And then after that, you can just use @ID. But you'll notice when you're using Android Studio, it's going to add the plus symbol everywhere, and that is okay. So now we're going to take a look at some specifics from the android.widget package. And these are the ones that inherit again from View, but we're going to look at TextView, EditText, and Button. So in this package, we have the items such as the TextView, button, checkboxes, radios, and so on. And really this package contains the UI elements that we would want to use on our screen. And you can create your own. You can basically extend the View class or a subclass of View if you want to create something that takes on some unique behavior. Working with Design View, we have the palette available to us. And from here, we can drag and drop to add items to the screen. And we have options when we're working with things such as the text view. For example, we might want to work with a plain text view. Click it and drag it into your XML. As you're dragging it, you'll see some guidelines starting to appear that can help you with spacing and alignment. That will generate for you the XML. So in this case, by dragging and dropping the plain text view, it's going to add that item into our XML and adjust for the layouts. When you do place something, it's going to have some default text. To change it, you can just double click it. That'll allow you to change the text and also assign the ID that you would like to use. So that's common for these three, the text view, edit text, and button. Let's take a look at some specifics. So with the text view, again, the purpose is to display text, and you can see that happening here, some text a little bit larger than the other text. So within the XML, we have some options that we want to set, some attributes, things such as the text appearance. And in the first case, notice how it's using text appearance large. The text value itself, which is here hello and welcome, and then an identifier in case we want to place something relative to it. Notice also the use of the layout gravity, center horizontal. That's giving us that center positioning of the hello and welcome. For the second one, we have the text. We are indicating just the identifier for it, but the margin, we're applying some spacing here of 20 dp. Remember that you want to use resources for strings. So in Android Studio, you will get some feedback. Here it's highlighted in yellow, indicating you really should externalize that string. But for our demonstration purposes, I'm going to continue going forward, showing you the string information that is being displayed. So from the palette, you have options. It's not just one text view. You have other options such as large text, medium text, and small text. And by choosing those, it's automatically going to adjust the XML attributes for you. Now you can go in and change the properties yourself. When you have it highlighted in the editor, off to the right-hand side, you can go into the properties pane and start making changes. Now there's a lot of properties, and what's interesting is you can start typing what it is you're looking for, such as text, and it'll bring up all the properties that start with text. So the attributes allow us to change our style and behavior. So some of those are inherited automatically when you do the drag and drop, but you have the ability as well to add these XML attributes. Now you can do that within the XML file, but also in your Java code, you can call methods to adjust the attributes as well. So AutoLink is one that you might want to work with if you're displaying information. Android can recognize if it has an HTTP that it's a link that you might want to make clickable, or if it has an @ symbol and an email address, it can make it so it's also clickable. So by using AutoLink, you are able to make it so that it's automatically going to be clickable if you have it set to true. Now the text is what we had gone over, the value of the text, but you can also call the method set text to change that. You can also work with the typeface, the style, the size, and the color. And we're going to be practicing with that as we go forward in the examples. When you're working with the size of your text, before we talked about DP, and that's fine, you can use DP, but you should really use SP and have awareness of what it does. 1 SP is equal to 1 DP, but it might be multiplied by a factor. So here we have an example where we're saying Android text size equals 30 SP. And what the SP means is the Android system is going to look, and if that person has used on their device the accessibility settings and indicated they want large text, then it is going to multiply it by a factor. Now this can vary depending on the different operating systems, but it's usually about 1.2 or 1.3 times the size of 1 DP. And that again is called a scale independent pixel. Now, instead of putting 30 SP directly, you could use one of 3 relative font styles. Some choices here are text appearance .small, and that is 14 SP, medium, which is 18, and then large, which is 22 SP. Again, the best practice for text is to use SP units because they can vary if the person has chosen that they want to work with accessibility, larger text. So let's take a look at EditText. It inherits the properties we just talked about with TextView, but then gives us some more options as well. For text input, this is going to appear on the screen by default as an item that has a line underneath it, indicating to the user that they can tap on it and start modifying the text. You can provide some hint information as we've done here for name, password, and email address. The way that looks in the XML is that we have an Android hint, and then we indicate what we would like to have displayed. So all 3 edit texts are listed here, and we have the same usage of the layout width and the layout height, but what we have different is the use of input type. Notice that for the first one, we're saying input type equals text person name, and then we have a text password, and then we last have a text email address. This can actually affect the behavior when the user's interacting with these edit texts. So EditText allows for these different types, and we can get those just by dragging and dropping, but you can also set those attributes as well. But notice we have quite a few that we can choose from. Beyond the ones just mentioned, we also have phone, we have addresses, times, dates, and so on. And that can really affect the behavior. Here's what it can look like, for example, if we're using text password. When the user is interacting with it, it's going to show up initially as a letter, but then that disappears and turns into a dot, hiding the actual password. We have the text email address, which the keyboard is changing. It is now providing an @ symbol because we're going to need that as we are creating the email address. And the text phone completely changes the keyboard. Here we have numerical values instead of the alphanumeric values. You can further adjust the properties by setting attributes. There's a list of these available in the API that we'll be taking a look at, but auto text is one if you would want auto correct spelling to happen. If you want capitalization, you can have it automatically capitalize. Again, with numerics, you could indicate you want digits. And if you didn't drag over a password, you can turn something into a password mode by just using the attribute of Android password. So lastly, let's take a look at button. It inherits from TextView, so it has the same attributes we talked about and a little bit more. Here we have a button, and by putting in the text, notice when it renders on the screen, it's surrounded by a rectangle. And it's going to go through different states when you interact with it. When you tap on it, it's going to look like that button has been depressed. This also is a subclass of TextView, so we inherit all of those other properties. And the background, though, is going to change states. This is something that you can adjust for within your code. And with the button, we have other attributes as well. We have one that is called onClick, that when the user clicks it, we can indicate which method we want to have called. Now we can also do this from the Java code by setting a listener, and we're going to look at both ways in a future module. Thank you for listening to this module. I hope it gives you some background on some of the work that we can do with view groups and views, and some ideas for working with the text view, edit text, and buttons. We're going to practice with that next in the demo that follows.